So let's look at an example of how one academic program has used rubrics in their student learning outcomes report. And you'll see with this one, those 8 steps we talked about earlier, that PDF that Marissa put into the chat a while ago goes into a lot of detail about these 8 steps. You may want to take a look at that. But you'll see that show up here now. A lot of you are familiar with student learning outcomes report. I know a lot of you have filled this out every year. Here's an example of the department that has used rubrics to really do this process really well. You'll see across the top their student learning outcome that they've identified. That's the same one that's in the catalog. You talk a little bit about the methods used to assess student achievement in the program, but they specifically zero in on looking at 24 papers and projects. That's their sample. That's what they identified as a sample they're going to use to rubric with. And on the next slide, we'll take a look. I'll show you in a moment what a rubric looked like. They submitted a rubric that's included with the report. They defined their performance target. Remember, we were talking about performance targets earlier. So they're using the type of language you described. For each of the dimensions rated, 70% of students will score a 4 or higher on a scale of 1 to 5. And then they go into some detail about what they found when they scored student work and started to aggregate it and looked at the patterns. So here's the rubric that they use. This was developed within a department. And it's a fairly analytic rubric. It goes into some detail about how students are expected to perform on the different criteria. And there's different well-defined levels of performance. It's fairly involved. It's a little bit, it gets into some areas that are really important for fulfilling the student learning outcome. And here's how they summarize it. They used both a figure and a table to describe their findings, but it goes into the means of standard deviation that really sort of aggregates up in a way the findings that that came out of the use of the rubric, that someone who's not familiar with the program can see the relationship. They had a student learning outcome. They talk about their targets. They showed a rubric. They provided a copy of the rubric. And then with this figure in this table, you can see what the outcomes were like for the sample that they used. So it's very clear to someone what was going on here. It's like it's a research study, almost like a SLO study in a way. And as I mentioned before, they started getting into some details about what was discovered in the analysis and got into some strengths and concerns with the assessment results. One of the reasons why we do assessment every year is to try to make things better. There's that improvement aspect as part of the assessment cycle. So they identify some things they may want to change as a result of doing this analysis and looking at these data. But I think this is a really great example of how rubrics can be used to do the assessment report. And notice it's not super detailed. It's not a lot of content here, but it really hits all those points we were talking about.